Welcome back. All right, so I saw a spirited debate about Lou Lamoriello's chops as a general manager, where somebody said, well, before the salary cap era, you could spend as much as you wanted, so Lou just bought a good team. That's why they won the cup. And I went, that's not how that went. It's not how I remember that. And so in order to discuss this, I thought that makes for a really good topic. Let's take a look at what the salary structures were for each team in the National Hockey League before we had a salary cap, and we can get into how this really changed things. Now, there are ways that teams can circumvent the cap. We've talked about this. We know the Arizona Coyotes for years had contracts on their team for players that were never going to play a game just so they could get to the cap floor. So it's not a perfect system, but it is vastly different than what the NHL had before. So, in alphabetical order from Anaheim through to Washington, because there was no Winnipeg, which when I was putting this together, I was like, great, why is the Winnipeg logo on there? Why is the Vegas logo on there? I had to kind of train myself back to 2004. Anaheim had a $38.8 million salary for their team in 2002 2003. They finished with 95 points and they were finalists. So that is a very low, and I keep wanting to say cap hit, but that's low salary. The following year, their salary actually went up to 54.4 million. The last year before we had a salary cap, and they actually dropped to 76 points and missed the playoffs. Atlanta, it's low in both cases, 27 million to 27.2 million, and they went from 74 points to 78 points and missed the playoffs both years. So we talk a lot about how Vegas came in and that changed how expansion's done. Well, expansion was about being cheap at the time. It's not just about the fact that, teams can protect all their best players. You also didn't go out and sign any big name free agents. Not because you can't, not because maybe you don't have the money for it, but because why? You're making money and you're only spending a little over $25 million in salary. When we go through this, you'll see how low that truly is. Boston, 36.9 million in 0203 to 45.8 million in 0304. They go from 87 points and losing in the first round to 104 points and also losing in the first round. Now, the numbers in red are $50 million and up, and you'll see that there were some that were close. Boston included that second year, but it didn't necessarily guarantee success. The Buffalo Sabres went from 31.5 million in 0203 to 33 million in 0304, and they went from 72 points to 85 points. In both cases, they missed the playoffs. Calgary went from 33.6 million, where they had 75 points and missed the playoffs, to 35.2 million, where they had 94 points and ended up in the Stanley Cup final, where they lost against Tampa. So 35.2 million, a low amount back then, and the Flames get all the way to the final. Carolina went from 38.4 million to 37.8 million, so they were spending more than Calgary, and they went from 61 points in 0203 to 76 points in 0304 and missed the playoffs both seasons. Chicago had 44.4 million in salaries in 0203. That drops to 31.6 million in 0304, and you can see it in the points from 79 points and missing the playoffs in 0203 to 59 points. And I forgot to write missed, but obviously they missed the playoffs with 59 points. So, yeah. Colorado, finally a team that has two red numbers. They go from 60.8 million to 60.9 million. And in points totals, they go from 105 points to 100 points, but they lost in the first round in 0203, and they lost in the second round in 0304. Columbus, another one that I was meaning to put the mist on for that second year. Columbus, expansion team, so very low salary overall. They go from 27.4 million to 32.1 million. They had 69 points in 0203 and missing the playoffs, 62 points and missing the playoffs in 0304. Dallas, high spending team, they went from 61.8 million to 67.6 million, the highest number that I have gone over yet on this board. And they went from 111 points and losing in the second round to 97 points and losing in the first round. So spending a lot of money is one thing, but spending it wisely is another. Now, Detroit had mixed results, but they won the cup enough that we don't talk a lot now about how they'd spend a lot of money, but there were definitely years Detroit spent a lot of money and didn't get the return. Regular season, sure, but playoffs not always. So they had 68 million in 0203 on their in their team salaries. 110 points that year they lost in the first round. I do believe that was the year with Curtis Joseph in net. 77.8 million in 0304, 109 points, and they lost in the second round. So they did win the cup in 2002. They'd win the cup again in 2009, but spending more money didn't necessarily translate to success every year. The Oilers, 31.5 million, dropped to 30.8 million. They lost in the first round in 0203 and missed the playoffs in 0304. So, yeah, for the Oilers, not an easy time of it. I was in a bit of a rush to get this one finished. Florida. Florida goes from 31.2 million down to 26.4 million, and all the tax breaks in the world didn't help them. They went from 70 points to 75 points, missed the playoffs both seasons. So, yeah, the whole Florida's got this huge advantage. Now they do because they've got good management. And again, back then it was, well, we're not going to spend it because we're not going to make it. The LA Kings went from 48 million down to 46.1 million. So they're spending pretty well. They're around the middle there. But 79 points the first season and they miss, and 81 points the second season and they miss the playoffs again. The Minnesota Wild went from 21.1 million to 26.8 million in their salaries. 95 points the first season and a conference final with a salary of 21.1 million for their team. And the following year, where their salaries go up by 5 million, they actually dropped to 83 points and missed the playoffs. And that conference final run, that's still the farthest that Minnesota's ever gone in a playoff. And again, the salary is 21.1 million. Montreal went from 48.6 million down to 42.7 million. We know how much money this team makes. 77 points the first year they missed the playoffs, and when their salaries dropped, they actually got better. 93 points, and they lost in the second round in 0304. Nashville, very static, from 23.3 million to 23.2 million. The first year, 74 points, missed the playoffs, and in 0304, 91 points, and they lost in the first round. New Jersey did spend a little bit more money, 51.2 million. In 0203, they finished with 108 points and they win the Stanley Cup. The following year, they spent 48.1 million, 100 points, and they lost in the first round. So 51.2 million is less than Colorado, Dallas, Detroit, the Rangers, less than Philadelphia, less than Toronto, a little bit more than Washington, not a lot, and less than St. Louis. So didn't buy themselves a Stanley Cup. They just spent smartly. I remember Bobby Holik wanting a bunch of money and Lou Lamoriello being like, off you go then. The New York Islanders went from 41.5 million to 43.8 million in their salary structure. 83 points that first year. They lost in the first round. And in 0304, the last year again before salary cap, 91 points. And again, they lost in the first round. The New York Rangers, the ultimate example people my age and around my age would use about you can't buy yourself a Stanley Cup. 69.2 million in salaries for 78 points in 0203 and missing the playoffs. The following year, that goes up to 77 million, 69 points, and still missed the playoffs. The Rangers spent money. They brought in every veteran you can imagine, and it just didn't work because they didn't seem to have a plan for how to use those players. And that's the thing that people forget. You can bring in all the big name stars you want, but if you don't have a plan for how to use them, the team may very well fail. The Ottawa Senators, 28.5 million in 0203. They finished with 113 points and went to the conference final. 0304, 39.6 million, 102 points. 102 points and round one. So spending more money did not equal more success for Ottawa. Philadelphia, a big spender, 55.7 million in 0203, 107 points. They lost in the second round. 65.1 million the following season, 101 points they lost in the conference final in 0304. Phoenix, so I had to put the Coyotes here because they're still Phoenix at this point. 43.9 million, which is not less than a lot of these teams on the board. 78 points, missed the playoffs. So it drops the following year, 0304, 37.8 million, 68 points, and again, they missed the playoffs. Pittsburgh at this point is in real financial difficulty. 31.2 million in 0203 was their salaries. 65 points to miss the playoffs. 03-04, they finished with 58 points, and they only spent 26.6 million. So while some of these teams with lower salaries, I keep wanting to say cap hits, and I keep catching myself, but the teams with lower salaries, a lot of them are expansion or new teams. Pittsburgh's just not able to spend that money. They don't have it. San Jose, 45.1 million in 02-03, 73 points, missed the playoffs. The following year, they only spent 34.8 million, and they finished with 104 points and went all the way to the conference final. So spend your money wisely, boys and girls. St. Louis was one of the big spenders during this era, and it did not benefit them come playoff time. Regular season, sure. 61.8 million, 02-03, they finished with 99 points, losing the first round. 61.2 million the following season, 91 points, and again, they lose in the first round. So that was definitely a storyline around them at this time, that they were a highly paid team, sort of, the Rangers of the West kind of thing. Tampa Bay, not a team that spent a lot. 28.9 million in 02-03, 93 points. They lost in the second round that year. 94. 03-04, 33.5 million, 106 points, and they won the Stanley Cup. So Tampa Bay wins the cup. They're only spending 33.5 million on their team. Toronto, spending a lot of money. We know that this would still be the case today. It doesn't necessarily equal success. 54.9 million in 02-03, 98 points, and out in the first round. The following year, they spend 61.8 million, 103 points, and they're out in the second round. Didn't benefit Toronto that year. Vancouver, kind of cheap at this point. A lot of the younger players not capable, or capable's the wrong word, are not in a position yet to cash in on their ability to put the puck in the net. So 35.3 million for the Canucks in 02-03. They finished with 104 points. They lost in the second round. 38.7 million in 03-04. They finished with 101 points, and they lost in the first round. So good regular season success, none in the playoffs, but they also weren't spending as much as a lot of other teams. Washington, they're red on both of them, over 50 million in terms of salaries. 50.4 million in 02-03, 92 points. They lost in the first round. They spent more money in 03-04, 51.1 million, 59 points, and missed the playoffs. So when we look at the current salary cap situation, the max is 88 million. The floor is 65 million. One thing that we had back then, which I don't think gets talked about enough when we have these debates about, how can you build a winning team back then? You kind of had to spend some money, but not necessarily. You had to hit at the right time, and you had to have the right contracts and the right players playing the right spots. And there were definitely teams that just threw money at players just to see what would happen. And okay, we'll give this guy 10 million to come here. We'll give this guy 6 million to come here. We'll see what it does, and it doesn't necessarily work. We still see that in the NHL now. Sometimes on July 1st, we'll see a big free agent signing. We'll go, wow, that team's going to be fantastic, and then they're not. So there's definitely a complicated route to winning in the National Hockey League. If we didn't have a salary cap now, we would definitely have haves and have-nots. Unlike this scenario, I think if we had salary cap and not salary cap, you would have teams spending $35 million on their team in general, and others spending 120 million, 130 million, because for the richer teams in the NHL, like Toronto, Montreal, Rangers, I think to some extent Chicago too, they can afford to spend it, and they would definitely be teams that have used ones like Columbus as a feeder. But it is interesting looking at what Florida was spending back then and Tampa was spending back then, and I mean, not entirely dissimilar when you combine the numbers for Florida and Tampa, but what a difference in what Tampa got out of their players, comparatively speaking, to what Florida got, because Tampa put together an excellent roster and won a Stanley Cup. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.